tea, y'all.
Get down tonight, Daddy.
It's time for Reality Gaze. We're here to cover another reality show. And while the video plays, just sit back and let go. Now, you may be thinking, where'd the theme song go? We made this little switch because copyright's a bitch. We got 90 Day, Mormon Wives, Lalo, and more. And now you can watch us, you whore. You like to watch. You dirty slut. Yeah, you know.
Like it, don't ya? A little too much. Ooh, moist.
RG on YouTube, y'all. I want to show my creamy shoulders. And maybe my nipple. Poodle, no! So, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. What a miss!
Boy.
Woo! This episode is called Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, an Epilogue.
An epilogue. Because there is no reunion, and we don't think there's going to be.
I don't think there's going to be a reunion. And this, we didn't do, we don't, reality gays are not really fond of doing extra episodes or emergency episodes. And I think the last thing we said about this was at the beginning of a Single Life episode. So I don't know how many people some people obviously watched it or listened to it. But if you were looking for Mormon Wives content about, or our comments about what happened with Taylor, Frankie Paul, and everything and The Bachelorette, you were kind of like, well, they've been very silent. Yeah, we were, because honestly, we did not know how to fucking talk about it. It's been really rough.
It was something that what we were both talking before, like we both thought about it nonstop for like 3 days.
And how do we talk about it? And what do we talk about that's going to add anything?
What am I going to say that's going to add anything of saying like, yes, this is horrible. The victims,
that
the children,
video was
like
terrible. It was awful.
Terrible. And the mental sickness of both of these parents with this child. Like, we could talk all about that, but I felt like, it almost felt like we've already said everything that needed to say in this season, but then we saw the reality, and suddenly this wasn't a reality show anymore. This was real life. And it was kind of like this moment for both of us of, oh, fuck. I don't know what to say about this. I don't want to go on here since we have a mouthpiece that affects people
and exploit something even more,
and exploit it and hurt people that have been through this even
for
more,
listens or
trigger
clicks.
them, because we know that your relationship to us is important. We've never had anything like this happen. I mean, we've had. No. Luckily, when there's stuff like with 90 Day Fiancé, it kind of like with Jeffrey and stuff, that all came out before. So we were able to not talk about it.
Right.
And this was different.
But I mean, I don't know who did it, but someone proclaimed us a Taylor Frankie Paul Stan podcast. I don't really remember who did it.
Boy, we're not doing that anymore. That went badly.
No, it was me.
Boy.
But the thing about it is, I have no problem saying she behaved horribly. And I think some people, I got a DM that said, you just don't want to say anything because you don't want to be pure wrong. I'm wrong all the time. And I will and I have no problem admitting that.
We were wrong about that. And, but there's a lot of factors, which I think leads us to this conversation today of why we wanted to get someone who's an expert.
Besides
truly.
Us two childless men.
Childless gay men.
Talking about domestic violence.
Who also have never been through. I've never been through physical domestic violence, and I think I've been through narcissistic abuse. That's different, but that's very different, and it's still not the cycles of DV. And so, even with my background, it's been years since I practiced, and I thought I'm not equipped to speak to this in a way again that like. Other people do what they want to do, but I just didn't want to jump on the mic and talk about this to get a bunch of YouTube views. I just didn't want to do that. And I know you didn't want to either.
And both of us said, after watching the video and the fallout and everything about it, both of us had such a bad taste in our mouth about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of sickened both of us to talk about it. Because I think of everyone involved and just it wasn't appetizing to talk about at all. And it was even hard when we talked about it on the Single Life, neither of us really wanted to talk about it.
No, it was so we had to because it just happened. But
it was in the air. But
I mean, we know that some of you, I'm sorry if some of you felt like we dropped the ball, but what we did was actually, which I'm actually proud of now, is we took a step back to process this and to speak into, again, hopefully in this conversation today, to add something to your context to make us, because how do we move on from this? How do we become better? How do we support victims better? That's what this is about.
And both of us wanted to find someone besides just us in our own little bubble. And I read some articles. Both of us took a look, and there was a media researcher who was quoted, Soraya Giaccardi Vargas, and I really liked what she had to say, and it made me think.
It really made me think too. And so we're excited for y'all to hear this.
So I emailed her, and she responded.
And there you go. I'm going to read go ahead.
So this is our interview. She works at the Norman Lear Center at USC, studying media. And you guys,
actually, I want to read a little bit because I want people to know who's speaking.
Yes,
but because she's a change researcher, a speaker, a strategic consultant, and it's all about she uses data-driven insights to harness the power of storytelling and change the narrative on pressing social. Or storytelling that changes the narrative on pressing social issues. And she's a senior researcher at the USC Annenberg Norman Lear Center's Media Impact Project. And she's previously held positions at the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. And her research focuses on representation and inclusion in media across gender, race, sexual orientation, ability, age, and how those representations kind of shape our real world attitudes and behaviors. And on a personal note, she grew up in Texas by way of Mexico City. And she got into this because she never saw her own identity represented on screen. And that's where this sparked this early interest in stories being told about marginalized communities and by whom. So that's what we thought made her a perfect person for us to speak to today.
The other thing, we were just talking to her about the end. We recorded the interview with her already, and we're just talking about it now. But how for a show like Mormon Wives, the show itself becomes the media. The media message is the message. In other words, what the show is telling us is what we're absorbing. That's the pill we're taking. So it's really interesting to think about that, what we're seeing, and how that, and then we have something real world. Like when this video comes out, we go, how do I square that with what I saw?
Because the network is telling you one thing, but now we have these people that.
So it's an interesting thing to think about, and so it's an interesting thing when we think about who is a victim, who are the winners, and who are the losers. Because that's what social media and media likes to tell us.
Yeah.
So let's listen to this video. We listened to this interview. This was really enlightening. I got a lot from it. She was great. We'll definitely have her back to talk about Love is Blind.
Yes, we were talking to her about Love is Blind after we stopped recording. She was interested.
So enjoy our interview with Soraya Giaccardi Vargas.
All right, everybody. Please welcome to the show, Soraya Giaccardi Vargas. Welcome.
Hi, so excited to be here.
Yes, we're excited for this conversation, and that, why we wanted to talk to you is that we felt, that we didn't want to just kind of speak to everything that was going on with Taylor Frankie Paul and the Mormon Wives and just kind of add to the cacophony of.
We felt out of our depth, honestly.
Yeah, and we felt and so we love. We read a few articles and then learned more about you, and that we're really excited for your perspective on this today. We think it's going to help a lot of people. But before we jump in, I want to ask. So tell everybody just a little quick rundown. What do you do?
Yeah, so I am a media researcher, which is a lot of fun because it means I get to watch a lot of television and film content. But what I do is I study the impact of entertainment media. So I look at, identifying the narratives in media and then looking at the impact on audiences on kind of our real world, our attitudes, our beliefs, our behaviors around various social issues.
Cool.
Got it. Which I think it makes you have a different, because, I haven't used it in years, but my master's in psychology, I'm no way an expert in DV or that type of trauma. But I think that what you bring to offer, it's not just about obviously the DV and the video of it, but how it's been resonated and portrayed in media.
So we wanted to ask you, it's pretty clear that Taylor's season of The Bachelorette would have aired completely if that video would have never been made public.
Yeah.
And so how would you characterize the media's reaction to domestic violence when it happens off camera?
Yeah, so I actually think that this situation is a really good example of kind of the power of audiences and the shifting kind of public discourse around topics like this. Obviously, I don't have any insider information. I don't know what executives did or did not know, but it does seem like a little bit of a stretch, right, to say that they were completely unaware of any red flags. So really what forced their hand was the public backlash.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of a larger trend that we're seeing with audiences more broadly, which is one, this increased desire for authenticity over performance, right? And an increased awareness about both the social impact and the social responsibility of these types of stories, right? So in the past, there was a lot of hesitancy on behalf of reality TV to kind of break the fourth wall, to intervene in situations, or to do anything that really kind of acknowledged that this content is in fact a production. But that just doesn't work as well with modern audiences, with their desire, right, for authenticity, their increased, kind of critical lens. It doesn't work as well, especially with younger audiences.
Yeah.
And do you think that...
Go ahead. I was going to say, and when you say the word authenticity, that was Taylor Frankie Paul's brand. That she says whatever comes into her, she wears sweats. She's the Bachelorette who does. So they thought they had it. At what price? How authentic do we want to get? Where it turns some, so that anyway.
Or even it's not just authenticity as individuals, but authenticity of circumstances and situations, right? There may have been a time where this kind of unfolding drama would have made for great television and people would have loved it and people would have watched it and it would have been problematic, but we wouldn't have cared as an audience, right? But now, again, with that increasing critical lens about what's our social responsibility here, there's this desire to be we could actually package this as really entertaining television, but the authenticity is the realization that these are real human beings, that their real lives are being impacted, the lives of their children are being impacted. So however we might dress it up for television and for our entertainment, it actually is a real situation involving real people with real consequences.
Yeah. The early 2000s was the Wild West time for that was when The Swan and Joe Millionaire, things like that. And we've moved past that. But
thankfully,
but
then also we have, but then in this show does, which, it's not just what's airing on the show, but now the network has people with huge social media audiences who basically have their own. At this point, someone could say the Mom Talk is its own network, literally. And so they can air whatever they want to air. That it totally, not even just for this video being released, but, even now afterwards, we're not even going to get into how none of them can stop talking about this. When I wish everybody would just kind of be silent a little bit and process, because we were kind of shocked after all this, even though we knew about the abuse, but to see it and in that way and the way everything went down, it took me as the only phrase I can think of as an audience member. I went, "Oh, this isn't fun anymore. This isn't fake TV anymore. This is a real life circumstance." But it doesn't seem like that anyone at Mom Talk is taking it that way. And it'll be interesting to see how the narrative keeps getting played out by then through social media.
Yeah. And from a psychological perspective, it makes a lot of sense. When we become desensitized to something, right? Desensitized to the real violence happening in this situation, that becoming desensitized actually hinders our capacity for empathy. It hinders our capacity to take other people's perspective, to feel empathy for them. And all of that in turn also hinders our ability and our desire to actually take action. Right.
Yeah.
And so it makes us a little bit more passive. We passively, we talk about it, we watch it, but we don't see it as something that we need to act on. And all of that is kind of the result of desensitization over time.
Yeah. I think I brought up too when I was chatting with you on the phone previously, because you had read an article, and that's how we find you. And I'm like, yes, we need to talk to this woman. And it was basically what you were talking about with desensitization. And I thought immediately of every single time that Taylor would argue with Dakota, it would turn into a screaming match. And that was kind of hard for, I started to disconnect because it was hard for me to watch. At one point, the Mom Talk girls, after a while, were just annoyed by it. No one was really concerned because it was just so commonplace for them,
that's a good
and
point.
it became the kind of the engine humming constantly in the background. And so I can understand why they're just like, oh, that's just Taylor and Dakota.
Exactly.
And we're just thinking, what do you think about, like, you brought up desensitization and how the slippery slope that this creates with creating this as entertainment, but also not even letting audiences realize, oh shit, I may be involved in some type of domestic violence situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's one of the complexities here is that on the one hand, we do want to use, especially a big cultural moment that everyone's talking about it, use it to raise awareness and to inform people about particular topics. But it's a tricky line to walk because that can very quickly turn into, using something for entertainment, or it can very quickly turn into kind of leveraging, therapy speak in ways that are inaccurate or that are harmful. And so it's this really delicate balance between this is maybe a teachable moment. How do we then leverage this moment for good, right? Without inadvertently causing more harm.
What is it? Just going off of that, like you brought them up, this was the first time that I had heard terms like reactive abuse and Darvo. They've gone like
we'd heard
wildfire. And in this discussion, is that a good thing? Like, are people learning the language of abuse, or is social media oversimplifying clinical concepts that actually can cause harm?
I mean, such a good question. I think, largely...
From a researcher, I know you're not a psychologist, but from a researcher perspective, I want to just add.
I think very often, largely, these discussions do get oversimplified on social media. And the other thing about social media that's hard is that the winners are often those with the loudest voices.
Yeah.
Not necessarily those with the most information or with the most nuanced take.
Girl, that is true. Keep going.
It's so easy for incorrect information to kind of spread like wildfire on social media. And then once it has spread, it's really hard to kind of walk that back. And so I think ideally, right, for anybody who wants to have these discussions on their social media and wants to contribute to the discourse, I think one thing that's really important is that if we're doing that, we are also bringing in credible resources into that discussion that other people can then, follow to learn more about the topic, or to learn about resources that exist for people in these situations. And bringing those resources into the fold is really, really important, because no one person can obviously educate everyone on all the nuances of this in a social media post, but you can direct people to places where they can learn about it, directing people to like the National Domestic Violence Hotline at thehotline.org, or to organizations like Futures Without Violence or No More or Free From, all organizations that people can go to learn more about the nuances of gender-based violence and to learn about the resources available.
And,
great.
Well, and you've talked about in that article too, in the 19th, I believe you talked about this idea that we've been trained to spot domestic violence like in a physical abuse type of way. We talked a little bit about this on the pod because I remember in therapy school, they talked about a lot of domestic violence doesn't leave a bruise. And it's hard to see that. So, but you mentioned though that this idea of physical violence as abuse, but there's other forms like coercive control, that these things are, you said, are much harder to depict on screen. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So if we look at media more broadly and we look at like what are the narratives that have been told about domestic violence on screen throughout time, we see that they focus almost exclusively on that physical and that sexual violence, right? But because domestic violence includes a range of behaviors, as you mentioned, it can include economic, emotional, psychological abuse. You know, right off the bat, what we are calling domestic violence on screen is actually just a little slice of a much larger issue. It's just a little slice of what domestic violence actually looks like. And in fact, we also see that very often media can romanticize unhealthy, coercive, and controlling behaviors.
Oh, wow.
And they often, you know, they become seen as like grand romantic gestures, right? So a really good example that is always a little difficult for people to wrestle with is Noah in The Notebook, right? Noah is... Yes.
Jake talks about The Notebook all the time.
I've talked about how it's not real. It's a very unhealthy portrayal of how you should not stalk this woman for this long for her life.
Yes, and he is hanging from a Ferris wheel with one hand and threatening to fall potentially to his death in order to get a date with Allie, right? And somehow in the movie, like the way it's set up in the movie, and you've got this beautiful Ryan Gosling looking at you and all of these things, and it gets reframed in our minds as cute and romantic. But if a friend came to you in real life and said, hey, guess what? I met this guy and he was hanging off the Ferris wheel because he wanted to go on a date with me. Like, what would you say to your friend in real life?
Run, girl.
Exactly. Like, we always joke about like those moments in horror movies where you yell at the characters, like, don't go in there. We weren't doing that with Allie when we were watching The Notebook, right? But some of those behaviors were really concerning. And another thing that we often see is, we see things like jealousy reframed as passion.
Yes, we see that a lot. Yeah.
Stalking reframed as courtship. Right. So one of the most like persistent narratives in rom-coms is that idea that you should never give up on love, right? That you should go to the end of the earth to win back somebody if you really love them.
You should fight for it. Fight for love.
Fight for it. And fighting for it often looks like stalking, right?
Yeah.
It often looks like stalking. And actually, a colleague of mine in graduate school, her name is Julia Littman, she actually did a study on this a while back. She ran an experiment with over 400 women, and she had these women placed into one of three different groups. One group of women were exposed to movie clips where this kind of persistent pursuit was framed as being romantic. So for that, she used clips, for example, from There's Something About Mary with Cameron Diaz. There was another group, right? That's the group that viewed clips in which persistent pursuit was framed as scary. That included, Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia Roberts and Enough with Jennifer Lopez. And long story short, those who saw the clips that framed persistent pursuit as scary actually showed lower endorsement of stalking myths. But those who saw the clips that framed persistent pursuit as romantic and who also viewed the films as realistic and they felt engaged with the narrative, they actually showed a higher endorsement of stalking myths. And stalking myths, those include things like, this idea that stalking is an expression of love, maybe misguided, but it's an expression of love. Or the idea that a victim is somehow asking for it. We often see that with this idea that like, they're just playing hard to get. They're playing hard to get, but really they like it, right? And we often see that in media. We reward it because in the end, the female character often does come around. And that is, problematic in its own way. And stalking myths are also involve this idea that stalking is not a real crime, right? That if there's no violence, it's kind of like no harm, no foul.
Because it was
no
done not with ill intent. It was done because you love somebody.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because they're my person, which is, we covered 90 Day Fiance. I'll go looking all over the world for my person because there's only one. Yeah, it's not great. And I think a lot of our listeners are watching because a lot of our listeners can pull themselves out of that and say, this is ridiculous. But what you're saying is just the tacit messages that we're getting from our media about is influencing how we are thinking about domestic violence. And for survivors who are watching all of this unfold, who are seeing the video, who are seeing the show, this kind of high profile case can be validating for them, saying, this is someone who was an abuser and they were silenced. They had something taken away, and also re-traumatizing. And what do you think the responsibility of media outlets and content creators, what do you think that they could do better or understand about that or explain better?
Yeah, I think there are several things that media can do to continue talking about these topics, but doing it in a way that is a little bit more responsible and has, a better kind of impact on audiences. One of those things is to stop talking about domestic violence as an individual issue and really more as a systemic issue.
Oh, wow.
So highlighting how things like finances, custody battles, divorce, litigation, all of these things can actually keep someone in a bad situation for much longer than ideal. Those are systemic barriers that can't be solved on an individual level, right? We also need to focus on the actions of the perpetrators and use active language, right?
Yeah.
So it's not the victim was threatened by blah, blah, blah. It's the perpetrator threatened someone, right? So using active language, focusing on the perpetrator, avoiding graphic imagery for the sake of entertainment value. And again, I always come back to highlighting resources, because just like media can be a really efficient vehicle for spreading misinformation or maybe some not so wonderful myths or beliefs, it can also spread positive information, resources, etc. So bringing into these discussions, again, information about like where you can go to learn more about this, where you can go to find resources in your area, etc. All of those things can be brought into the discussion and can make this process a little bit healthier for everyone.
Yeah, very much so. Soraya, this has been a great conversation. You have a real job, so we're not going to keep you too much longer because we know that you have stuff to do. I feel like we could have a whole discussion with you about Love is Blind. I don't know if you've ever seen Love is Blind, but
honey,
as you're talking, a lot of things, I'm like, oh, that's what I saw. That problem. I'm having all these
We may have to talk to you again when Love is Blind. We can just let you watch an episode and you'll be like, oh, holy shit, I've got a lot to say about this.
Have you watched it?
I have watched it in the past, but it's been a while. Let's do it though.
Yeah, let's do it.
I should mention, I am a developmental psychologist by training.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
One of the lenses that I'm always using when I'm thinking about the impact of media is thinking about the impact of media in relation to our development as human beings. And so all of these things that we're talking about, they impact audiences broadly, but I'm thinking specifically about like, how does this impact adolescents who don't have real world experience to compare this to, right? They don't have real world dating experience, real world sexual experience, and their ideas of what love and relationships look like are entirely formed on what people have taught them, whether it's media, their parents or schools, peers, etc. At that very critical age, it's informed by outside sources. And so, it really makes you think about like that particular vulnerability about these messages that, we're acknowledging that some of these messages are harmful, but when you put them into context of that like particularly vulnerable period in time, it raises a lot of other questions.
Yeah, and I think, one of the larger questions for a lot of people was wrestling the idea of how, I don't think we talk a lot about female perpetuated domestic violence, like in the 80s and 90s when we watched the movies that I watched growing up.
Yes.
The after
Sleeping
school
with the Enemy. It was the man.
It was always the man.
The towels and the Lifetime movies with like She Cried No, and the titles of where the man was the threat, and but this is female perpetuated violence and how it was treated differently. And what does the research say about how gender shapes our perception of who counts as a victim and what a victim is?
It's so interesting because, so much of like gender roles could be summarized with it's a double-edged sword for women, no matter what, right?
Yeah,
but we are primed to think of women as victims, but at the same time, we want them to be perfect victims, right?
That's great. Yeah.
The victim with a perfect past, the victim who is poised and graceful and responds, logically and thoughtfully and never from a place of anger. And so it's this double-edged sword because even though we are primed to think about women as victims, when they fail to live up to that perfect victimhood image that we have, we actually punish them even more harshly for responding to a situation in a way that we don't like.
Yeah, we had several, we call our listeners sissies. And I had several sissies message me through Instagram just saying, I was in this situation. And what we forget is that when people are involved in an abusive relationship, whether physical, emotional, the rates of drinking are higher, the rates of depression are higher, the rates of and they talked about, I was a victim of my husband or my boyfriend, but yet I also was a raging alcoholic. Had burst of and it hits me. That's what I think. Yeah, this idea of being a perfect victim, and I don't think that's the case because it's a horrible situation for both people to be in, and people develop coping mechanisms that work in the moment that eventually lead to more toxicity.
Exactly. And that complexity of how we respond to situations like that, all of that is kind of left entirely off the screen or entirely out of a lot of our discourse. And I think that's kind of the missing component for really bringing this conversation forward.
Yeah. Great. This has been so great, Soraya. My brain is now like firing because I want to bring you on to talk about all of our like screwed up shows that we talk about. You would love a show called Love After Lockup. You could write a whole dissertation.
You could
about
do another
people,
dissertation,
about people
on it. I will do some binge watching, and we can circle back.
Yes. Go ahead.
Where can people find information about you and the Norman Lear Center? Because we actually have a mutual friend who works, so I've been to some functions there. It's really a wonderful, wonderful organization, especially with what is happening in media now and in the world. But tell everybody where they can find you and learn more.
Yeah, so you can learn more about me and my work at sorayagiaccardi.com. And on there, you will actually be linked to the Norman Lear Center. And you can see a lot of the reports that we've put out there. I also use social media as a place to talk about a lot of this. So you can also find me on Instagram at Soraya Giaccardi. And from there, it's very easy to then track down all the other orgs like in this space, like Lear Center, Gina Davis Institute, et cetera, that I'm frequently referring back to.
Great. And all of those links will be either in the podcast show links or on our YouTube channel in the bio there. Soraya Giaccardi Vargas, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you
for having me.